Good morning. I'm very happy and honored to be here. I'm going to speak about the broader context, political context of the Russian politics of memory, or as I prefer to call it, historical propaganda. And I think that we should look at it also from the point of view of the ongoing confrontation between democracies and autocracies in a global scale. And I totally subscribe that in this given this broader political context, we must support independent Russian and not only Russian historians as much as we can. First, I would like to identify the key factors shaping the current historical propaganda in Russia. First is the lack of national identity. The imperial idea, the mythologized glorious past, is supposed to consolidate and unite the otherwise deeply atomized society. And this atomization is not only the result of centuries of Russian history, but also of deliberate efforts of Putin's regime. The second factor is the lack of confrontation with the totalitarian past. As we know, the perpetrators of the Soviet state terror have never been punished, and this gave the opportunity to revive this totalitarian past, the pride with this kind of powerful state, and that has resulted in the myth of the good empire and the idea of Russian supremacy. And this idea of Russian supremacy has two principal aspects. The first one is of religious nature, it's messianism. We are Russians, God is with us. And the other one, the non-religious one, is the idea of state civilization reflected in the new draft concept of historical education. The third factor is the vested interests of Putin and Putin's inner circle, as well as the broad nomenclatura. They want to legitimize the oppressive regime. They want to legitimize the corruption. So they, at a certain point, quite long ago, almost 2 decades ago, they decided to shift the society's focus from domestic to foreign policy and from future, and the regime is not able to offer any kind of attractive idea for the future. So they shifted the focus from future to the glorious past. And they have been playing on deeply ingrained public beliefs, phobias, myths, and fears, because this kind of propaganda quite widely resonates among the Russian public. And the fourth factor is the ambition to destroy the current international legal security order in Europe. And it is a kind of revenge for the lost Cold War, but this is also about Putin's personal ambitions and obsessions. But again, it's also about the systemic legitimacy of the regime, because democratic values are seen as a lethal threat to the regime. So they decided to present them, the values, as the lethal threat to the Russian statehood too. I would also say that imperial expansion is supposed to be a means to avoid domestic implosion, given a myriad of domestic political, economic, and social problems. And a very important point, a very specific vision of history, especially the topic of the Great Patriotic War. It's not only about reviving the memory, the distorted memory of this war, but it's basically about a sort of historical reenactment. I mean, the Kremlin wants Russians to live within the Great Patriotic War again and fight against the so-called Nazism again. And this is an ongoing, I would say, Orwellian battle against the West and hostile democratic values. Memory politics, historical propaganda, is also a part of two domestic political trends that have been developing very quickly recently. And it serves the consolidation of these trends. So these are neo-totalitarianism and neo-fascism, basically the wrapping and the content. Neo-totalitarianism is about indoctrination, censorship, and repression that have been growing exponentially during the recent years since the full-scale invasion started. It's about imposing one canonical history narratives in textbooks, in schools. It's about punishing those who present alternative visions of history based on facts. It's about an ambition to totally control what people even read on the internet and say in public, but sometimes also in private. And it's about a very peculiar social engineering project carried out mostly in the patriotic education process. It's about raising new generations in the cult of certain anti-values promoted by the Putin's regime. And it's about seeing history as a part of cognitive warfare against the West. What about the neo-fascism, wrapped as neo-Sovietism? It's one of the paradoxes. I don't have enough time to explain it right now, but the fight against Nazism, the fight against fascism is used by the regime that promotes, in fact, fascist ideas and fascist anti-values. The most dangerous and the most worrying idea promoted by Putin's regime is the idea of national rebirth and moral healing through war. And this is based on the Great Patriotic War myth, the fight against Nazism, but also the current war, the so-called special military operation, has already become a part of the great Russian history, and the current war is presented in school history textbooks as part of a history, but also at the same time as a part of a contemporary eternal war. So this is how Russians are supposed to live in this historical reenactment. It's about the cult of strongman's rule, glorification of strong leaders, appreciation of Stalin. Historical propaganda and history education in schools are based on anti-intellectualism, on this idea of Russian supremacy that I have already mentioned. And there is also a lot of newspeak about history. I mean, using words contrary to their primary meanings, about lies, about manipulations, about the reversal of terms and notions. And this is also a cult of the death on the battlefield that is imposed and instilled already in 6 or 5-year-old children in kindergartens. I can't say, frankly, how society will react at the end of the day to these Kremlin's ambitions. But what we have seen for decades now is the impressive ability to adapt to all kinds of oppression and repression. But also, the regime has been growing the new expanding group of beneficiaries of the war, not only in financial terms, but also in moral terms. And what makes the situation even worse is the lack of alternative. And this is why we must support all fact-based historical narratives and the work and research of independent historians. What are the consequences for Europe? I would say that the picture is quite bleak, because this type of bellicose regime didn't emerge overnight, as we know, and the West was feeding it and appeasing it for decades. Now, with the current policy of growing censorship, indoctrination, propaganda, I think that the threat for the European security order will be here for decades again, and it will remain unless a fundamental political change takes place in Russia, which seems unrealistic as of today. Unless Russians reject the imperial project, the aggressive militarism, and unless they see it as compromised for good, as something that simply can't and doesn't work, all future Russian leaders will always press this button because that would be the easiest way to mobilize society around the flag in the conditions of deeply organically corrupt and oppressive regime. What can we do to compromise this kind of bellicose project? Russia's defeat in Ukraine, or a series of minor defeats or one large defeat. So logically, we must support Ukraine and provide it with all kinds of super advanced weapons to just stop this war on Ukrainian terms. Deep economic crisis in Russia. Russians must see that they will pay increasingly for Putin's ambitions, but also they will pay increasingly for their own ambition or their lack of protest against this kind of regime that formed in Russia decades ago. Because it's not only Putin's war, it's Russia's war in a sense that all Russians, or a large part of Russian society, bears this responsibility for allowing Putin to consolidate his power, his oppressive and aggressive power throughout decades. But we also need to think about how to deal with this lack of confrontation with the past and the present. And I mean the tribunal to try Russian war crimes. Unfortunately, neither of the two tribunals created so far can try Putin in absentia, for example, which would be a huge blow to his international image and domestic image. Given the sad experience of Germany, I think that the fascization or the imperialization of Russia would take even a longer time than in Germany. And it would need the entire system of education and memory politics to be changed and rebuilt from scratch. It doesn't seem realistic. So unfortunately, we should be prepared for decades-long policy of deterring Russia. But the flip side or the bright side of this is that we can still support those anti-regime and anti-war groups, mostly in exile, but also in Russia, who try to still do something positive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Stay there for a moment. Yeah. Thank you so much, Maria. Maybe just a follow-up question from my side straight away. I mean, you already mentioned some of the consequences for the European Union and European Union countries. Well, actually, naming those is rather bleak. My question would be, how do you see this, historic narratives and historic propaganda being put forward here within the European context? Is it through direct Russian propaganda in media and social media? Is it the populist parties? Is it support of particular movements within Europe? Maybe if you could give us kind of a mapping of those activities, that would be useful.
Oh, okay. How many hours do I have? No, I'm kidding.
1 minute.
I'm kidding. Well, I think that the most destructive aspect of Russian propaganda focused around history and disinformation focused around history is not even to convince to certain Russian point of view or a narrative. It's about sowing doubt, distrust. It's about total whataboutism and relativism and symmetrism. So, okay, maybe we're not right, but others are not right too. And also Russia is building and playing on a sort of imperial and colonial thinking that is, again, deeply ingrained in the West about Russia, Ukraine, and our region in general. So what we see is still the Russia-centered academic research in the West. I mean, it needs time for the Western researchers and academics to redefine their own thinking and admitting that Ukraine as a is a full-fledged nation with a full-fledged culture and language and identity, and it's not a part of Russia. It's not even sort of a one nation with Russians, because it's something that Ukrainians are strongly opposed against, and they are building their strong national identity against Russia and this imperial idea. So I think that It's also about sowing distrust towards our governments that stand with Ukraine. And above all, the overarching goal is to make the existing divisions in democratic societies even deeper, because the general, I would say, one of the key points, one of the key assumptions in the Russian strategic culture is that if they can destroy the West using cheap methods and not expensive methods like sending tanks, they would always choose cheap methods like disinformation, propaganda, provocations, sabotage, and all kinds of active measures. And destroying democracy as an idea in the heads of people, in their minds, in their hearts, is one of these active measures, being a part of a broader ongoing war against the West.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria.